Welcome to Music Ed Tech Talk, a podcast exploring music, education, technology, and the intersections between them, with a special focus on the productive and creative process. I'm your host, Robby Burns. Thanks to my sponsor this week, Scale Exercise Play-Along Tracks. There's been so much stuff that has happened since you and Craig joined for the holiday gift guide. That was feels like ages ago that we recorded that. But things have happened in the industry, and then there are a couple, 2 or 3 fairly heavier topics that involve nuance and depth. So I thought we could talk tonight about some recent news. We could talk about ChatGPT. We could talk about Mastodon. And then sort of a fun topic I thought we could cover. There's all these new iPad creative apps. The Affinity stuff is updated. Freeform we're using right now to collaborate on this recording. DaVinci Resolve, the famous free video editor that's very powerful. That's on the iPad. And then I'm beta testing some stuff that I probably can't say too much about, but I'd like to at least acknowledge.
Well, I want to know. Let's do it.
Okay. So there's a reason why I wanted you to talk about all of these topics, because number one, you're a good explainer, and some of these richer topics I feel like you're going to be able to explain really coherently and concisely.
I hope so.
That's the reason. But also, one of the news items one of the things is that MuseScore 4 has come out, and you wrote a really, really detailed post for scoring notes. I just thought, I don't know if we can really get into the weeds. I know a lot of music teachers have moved to, over the years, moved to things like MuseScore and NoteFlight, dominantly because they're free and pretty simple, and they don't involve a lot of fussing with license keys or subscription pricing or anything, and they just can get a really quick job done. So MuseScore 4 really changes quite a lot about it. Can you feel like you can give a pretty brief overview of it?
Yeah, I can give a brief overview of MuseScore. So MuseScore, for those that aren't familiar, we should start by saying, is a free open source music notation application. It runs on Mac, Linux, and Windows, and it was recently, I guess not that recently anymore, several years ago, it was acquired by a company called Ultimate Guitar. Ultimate Guitar rebranded itself as Muse Group and has grown to include a bunch of other applications, including StaffPad and Audacity, the open source free audio editing application. So this is this new huge kind of umbrella organization that makes music and audio software. And they hired an internet celebrity sort of person, Tantacruel, and they didn't hire him because he's famous. They hired him because he's quite talented. His real name's Martin Keary, and they hired him first after he made a video about how bad the user interface of MuseScore was, and he was referring to MuseScore 3 point something when he made that video, and they said, all right, smart guy, you come here and fix it. And so now Martin Keary basically runs music software for Muse Group. He is mostly in charge of MuseScore and Audacity are kind of his 2 bigger projects at the moment. And so he went about solving a lot of user interface problems. It's now a lot easier to use MuseScore. It looks much more like a modern application. Martin was a part of the big kind of Windows user interface overhaul that came with Windows 8 and what was at the time called the Metro user interface. And these really nice kind of flat, clean, very minimal design, but also very clear. And so I think it looks much more like a professional application and not like, well, what open source software usually looks like. There were a lot of problems with the way MuseScore laid out things, especially when it came to rhythm spacing. And there's a lot of weird nuances to how rhythm spacing works. It's not just that longer notes get more horizontal space. There's a lot more to it. And MuseScore was pretty bad at that. It's still got some issues, but it is so much better than it ever used to be. And so that's kind of the biggest headline feature, at least for the kinds of work that I would ever do in notation software. The second biggest headline feature, and I think this is probably the one that has gotten the most attention from the most users, certainly from the internet, because it's very impressive at first listen, is the new audio they completely redid the audio engine in MuseScore. You can use virtual instruments just the same way you can in Dorico and digital audio workstations. But perhaps more importantly, Muse Group went out and recorded a complete sample library. I shouldn't say complete. They recorded an enormous sample library. I guess no sample library can ever be complete. But this is the sort of thing that normally people pay hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars for. And it's the sort of thing that costs to produce hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they made this and gave it away for free. And so these are high quality audio samples. They're not synthesizers. So most notation software by default is using some kind of synthesis. Some of it's very good synthesis, some of it's very bad synthesis, but this is actually putting a professional musician in a nice hall with nice microphones and recording them making every sound that they can make on their instrument and using very clever software to stitch those back together and create very realistic sounding demos, which are really, really impressive. Even during the MuseScore 4 beta period, I actually had a student who was, this student owns Sibelius Ultimate, and they bailed on Sibelius Ultimate to work in MuseScore 4 beta instead because they really liked the MuseScore sounds. And they're called Muse Sounds. They are also free. You can download them and manage them from a new little helper application called Muse Hub. And they are actually created by David William Hearn, who may be familiar to musicians and music teachers as the co-founder of StaffPad, an excellent composer in his own right, and is responsible for a lot of the work that went into the really impressive audio work in StaffPad. And he brought a lot of what he learned. It's not exactly the same as the StaffPad engine, is my understanding, but he brought a lot of what he learned over to this new Muse Sounds project, and it's really, really impressive.
Great summary. I think there's layers to the topic of what is the landscape of score creation editing software. I mean, in the current day. I mean, and if anyone wants to get really nerdy with this stuff, they definitely should go listen to your podcast scoring notes, read your write up on it. You all had a whole episode about sort of behind the scenes of this, which goes into way more technical detail of MuseScore 4, but you also have from time to time have done episodes that sort of cover what are the major movements in this space. And I think it's it's important to recognize and note when something is free. Free speaks to teachers. And I hear you all out there. I know it's sometimes I talk about nice apps that cost some money. So I want to just tell you that if you're looking for a free thing, then one of the free things that probably half of you already are using just got a lot better.
I said this in my review. I said this on the podcast as well. I think the new sounds in MuseScore are better than all of the sounds in all of the paid applications, and they're a lot better even than Note Performer, which is what I think a lot of us who are in this kind of middle ground between wanting slightly nicer sounds than the application ships with and not prepared to spend the time and money to make a really nice mock-up with really expensive fancy sample libraries are using Note Performer, which is $115, $120 or something like that. And I think these free Muse sounds sound at least twice as good as Note Performer. They're very, very impressive. And they're free. I've also always said that the most important feature of MuseScore is its price, and that is no longer the case. That is still a most important feature, but it's not the only really important feature that it has going for it anymore. I think that there are some ways in which it can compete with some of the commercial applications really for the first time.
Yeah. Well, this is a segue. I included MuseScore 4 on a YouTube video I made that I wanted to refer listeners to. I did a YouTube video. I don't always vlog, but when I vlog, it's top 10 apps for music teachers in 2023. I went for the clickbait title. I thought it would be interesting just though to kind of, I'll put a link to that for anyone who wants to go out and watch that. I did not intend to review all 10 of those apps again here. That's what the video was for. But I did get some feedback from a number of people where it's the thing that I put in the video is someone would write to me and say wait, that's not the thing I think you use. And so I thought it would be worth unpacking that at some level here, which is to say that like MuseScore, for example, is not my primary score editing app, nor is Things, which is the to-do app that I highlighted in that video, nor is that like my primary daily driver of a task app. So I thought that what I would do is just simply say that like sometimes I try to recommend a thing that I think is going to appeal to the widest variety of people and meet someone where they are in their professional life. And while I do use OmniFocus for my tasks, and I certainly, there are places you can find me on the internet talking at extreme length about that. I feel like there's things out that, like I use Obsidian for my notes, not in many cases Craft. I do use Craft, but that was actually Craft is the first app in the video, and I got a lot of very positive feedback about like lots of people wrote to me and were like, I have to use this. Where do I start? Like this has got to happen.
Craft is amazing.
It's incredible. I mean, there are episodes of this show I'll link also in the show notes to this one where you can go learn more about Craft. The topic of like building a second brain, Dr. Corey Meals came on and we talked about that over the summer. Like there's just so much you can do, but I just thought it would be fun to real quick like rattle off what are the actual apps in some of these categories that I like use a little bit more heavily. And so I thought I would say Craft is something I use heavily in most of the ways in the video that I demonstrated, but Obsidian, which is a free and cross-platform and in some cases very similar app, is actually what I'm using mostly for like my personal note-taking. So if something is going to be shared to the internet, I'm doing it in Craft, but I'm actually using Obsidian for a lot of my own personal use. And that's mostly because of it's a lot of little tiny things, but basically it's more customizable. It has its own user-built plugin system where someone can add a feature to the app and you can just install it for free right into the app.
I feel like I'm almost ready to consolidate a couple of different things that I do into Obsidian. I'm really digging Obsidian the last couple of months. I just started it. I'm very late to the Obsidian bandwagon, and I have been using for years an app called Ulysses to write my lesson outlines. Anytime I'm going to do an outline for a class that I'm teaching, I do that in Ulysses, which is a very, very simple, it's opinionated in its simplicity, what it does and does not do. But it's very simple, and I value that. And I have been using it for about 4 or 5 years. And I, like every 18 months or so, I will run into an error with its syncing from my Mac to my iPad or whatever. And it really messes me up. And I had that happen a couple of times in December. And so I started looking for something else, and I'm really liking Obsidian so far.
I think what turns some people off to it is that it seems like maybe it's the same reason why I didn't include OmniFocus as my task app of choice in the video, was they both in the past have given off this feeling of like that you need a PhD. And
it's very nerdy.
But I actually think it's very nerdy, but sometimes that is the discourse surrounding the tool, not actually the tool. Like I will say that Obsidian, once it finally released, like it came out of beta a couple months ago and like was 1.0, it's honestly like I've been using it for over a year now, and it is like the 1.0 is like just totally fine to be anyone and use. Like you don't have to get crazy about it. Like it's only really crazy if you approach it from this perspective of like, oh, I heard I can like hack it with all these cool plugins and stuff. But if you just want to write text in it, it's not really that fussy. But it does not have a lot of the share here, like let me generate a link and share it to people kind of stuff that Craft does. And I feel like that has been a much bigger game. Like I can much more easily, if I had to live in one of these two apps, I think it would probably have to be Craft, even though it doesn't give me the customization. It's the ability to share something or multiple things inside of it and make it look like a pretty website for someone else that, has really totally reshaped my workflow.
Yeah, that's the thing that I use Craft for as well, is for publishing things. The thing that I like the most that surprised me about Obsidian, I didn't know that it would be able to do this, is that it can put a little audio player in line in my lesson plan. So if we're looking at a piece in my music theory class that I want to be able to play a recording of, I used to, on my iPad, have to switch over to some other application. Lately, it has been Goodreader, but it could also be Spotify or whatever. And I would bring that in my iPad and slide over and then play it from there. But now there's like just a little play button right underneath the part of the lesson that has that description, and I can just tap it right there, and it plays it, and it's great. And I'm AirPlaying to an Apple TV while I'm teaching all the time, so everything plays over the speakers, and AirPlay is mostly reliable for me there, audio-wise. Video-wise, it's great. I've never had any problems with the AirPlay screen mirroring in GoodNotes. It's the audio that always messes me up.
I do use Obsidian. I use OmniFocus for my tasks. OmniFocus and Obsidian both. It's funny you mentioned that little audio thing, because I think the reason why sometimes I'll like kind of dip my toe in a simpler, like maybe better designed app, but then sometimes I'll like come back to one of the other tools. It's always like a couple of really, really little things. For me in OmniFocus, like the most recent time I started trying to use things full time, it doesn't handle repeating tasks really well. And like I want to be able to do something like really, really easily set up. Like OmniFocus might not like be the simplest looking tool on the surface of it, but doing hard things with it is actually easier than doing hard things with anything else. And I don't even know if a repeating task should be a hard thing. Like saying like I want to do this task every morning when I get to work at 8 a.m., like making a task that shows up Monday through Friday only at 8 a.m., like I don't even think that's possible in things.
Wow.
And that was like what eventually made me need to bounce back over to OmniFocus full time. Was that kind of thing, like here, do this every fourth Friday of the month, or remind me to, I have a little sequence that I do when I get to my desk that all generates an OmniFocus every morning. It's like my morning review, and it just reminds me to like set up change the date on all of my agenda slides for the day, this kind of basic stuff, but that slips through the cracks. So OmniFocus, Obsidian for its openness and its plugins. I also, as far as like scoring apps go, I think it's obvious to anyone listening to this, Dorico is like my main app that I it's just love it so much. I recommend it to anyone and everyone. It's got a great workflow. I'm fast in it. It's got a beautiful design. I love it a lot. And there's episodes of the show, of course, where you can learn more about that too. So I'll link them all, but just wanted to. And then all those other apps don't have, as far as I'm concerned, don't have anyone else competing with them. I mean, I guess you could say like GoodNotes, there's like Notability, but I don't even recommend Notability anymore because GoodNotes feels so good to write on with an Apple Pencil.
Well, and also now GoodNotes can record audio, which was, formerly the killer feature of Notability. So you can do the one thing in GoodNotes that Notability used to have as their unique value proposition.
Does it do that thing where it like links your notes to the timeline of the recording? So like if I'm writing...
I think so. I can't say that I've spent a ton of time with it. It's not a thing that I find super valuable. I understand why other people do, but I've never tried it myself.
Okay, interesting. I've always thought that getting feedback at, like we're going to take our bands to an adjudication next month. And I've always thought that, we do have a system now where it's like, I think it's a Google Doc now where the judges type the feedback into instead of a handwritten form. But it's always crossed my mind how interesting it would be to like actually see the moment of the recording of my band where a judge was thinking to write something about tone or breathing. That always felt like it would be instructive. And that's kind of, again, the value proposition of something like Notability.
Totally.
I think lecture, like taking notes on a lecture is more the common use case. Like a student recording a class and then taking some notes. Anyway, right. So top 10 apps for music teachers in 2023. Go check it out. One last little thing, just a personal note. I am presenting at the Texas Music Educators Association Conference next month. I'm doing 2 sessions. One of them is on Wednesday, February 8th. It's on digital organization tips for music teachers, the subject of my book. And then the other is on Friday, February 10th, and that is on teaching intonation with tonal energy. I'm very proud of this session. I presented this session at the Ohio Music Conference last February, and at dinner hour, in the middle of a blizzard that like canceled most people's flights, I had standing room only for teaching intonation with tonal energy. There were people lined up in the hallways outside the doors, lining the walls, just to come nerd out about intonation. So anyway, if you're gonna be at the Texas conference and you listen to the show, let me know. I'd love to say hi. I'd love to see you at some of those sessions. I expect to have a lot of fun. All right. Oh, okay. I feel like ChatGPT and Mastodon are pretty. I just want to like get to the dirt, get to the meat.
Let's get the good stuff. Yeah.
Let's get to the good stuff. Why are we even talking about ChatGPT? What is ChatGPT? It's something that has enough buzz that like teachers are talking about it. I'll put it out there. So I don't think it needs quite the introduction that Mastodon does, but I do feel like maybe if you want to be explainer in chief and kind of like set up.
I will say that it is a
and then we
huge
can talk
thing
about-
in higher education. It is a thing that has come up a lot in various higher ed publications. So ChatGPT is an interface to GPT-3, which is a machine learning algorithm by OpenAI, and it is perhaps best known as a tool for generating large chunks of text very quickly by a computer program, and it is very good at making something that seems pretty realistic in certain parameters. So you can ask it questions and it will answer them. There are a lot of problems with the answers. For one, they're sometimes wrong and it doesn't understand what wrong is. And so it will tell you the wrong thing with exactly the same level of confidence that it will tell you the right thing. But it is a very, very impressive piece of software, and it is, if nothing else, super fun to play with.
I know like that one of the things we do at my school is the orchestra director and I will just sit next to each other and like just like turn our like laptops towards each other and show each other cool things we typed into it. I mean, like he once did. He has a daughter who he was like wrote a little prompt about her. He said, "Write me a choose your own adventure story about a 9-year-old girl who loves to dance and resists bedtime." And it like starts thinking, and it's like, okay, here's the story of a girl, and it's bedtime, and she just got back from dance, and it's like narrating out the whole.
Sorry,
right, exactly. But it's like narrating the whole story. And it's time for bed, and, she starts to throw a fit. What do? A, let her dance in the living room for 5 more minutes, or B, put your foot down and say, no, you've had enough time, it's bedtime. And then it like kind of writes it, and then he says like, okay, the girl's name is, and then he types in his daughter's name, and then it rewrites the whole story using, referring to her by name. And then, and then the all of the like of it was like really just like beating you over the head with the obviousness of like this theme of like listening to your parents is important. And I said, you know what, that's a little bit, if the whole point is that like you're using this as a tool for your child, I feel like the message is too heavy-handed. And so he types in, make the obey your parents theme more subtle. And then it adds a couple more. It says, first of all, it says, okay, making, it tells them exactly what it's doing, and then it rewrites the whole thing. And yeah, I mean, it's like a lot of fun. I would like to tell you, though, that like there's a couple things I've actually used it for practically, and this is why I think it's getting so much discourse, is because it is the kind of thing that on the surface doesn't really have a killer app, but there are a couple of small areas where this has actually benefited my life. The first of which is automation nerd in me. Like, I know what I want to do with my technology sometimes, but I sometimes don't have the technical skills to get my results. This thing doesn't just do text, it does code, it does images. So I can say to it, like, write me a JavaScript that duplicates a file, renames it this, and then throws, the old one in the trash. And so, I understand the logic of a computer well enough to be able to kind of coach it through in multiple steps, like getting that script to work the way I want it to, but I just don't really know all the syntax, nor do I know where to start. So I've had it write me a couple of pretty good, really, really short scripts that would automate something that would otherwise take me a lot of taps or clicks on my computer. Thing two is I had it write my program notes for a concert pretty recently. And yeah, I needed to have them. And there's something, it's funny. I showed the whole conversation of me coaching it through writing the program notes to another teacher, and they were like, wouldn't it have taken you less time to just write the program notes? And I said, well, first of all, not as fun. Second of all,
it's like, yes, but did you see the robot?
The robot did it. So there is a part to writing where I feel like creatively I work really well with constraints, and I work really well with I get excited about the beginnings and the ends of things, But like the middle bulk of a very, very long or a short creative project is typically where I'm really good at like refining and sharpening things, but there are a lot of places for me to get like stuck. And there were just phrasings and like sort of grammatical things that were areas where I would have gotten stuck, where like it did it for me. And then all I had to do was actually the real meat of it, which is like, what's funny is that the piece I was writing program notes for was an arrangement of Never Gonna Give You Up for middle school band. So I'm like,
so are you saying that you rickrolled the robot?
Oh, hadn't thought about it like rickrolling the robot. I'll tell you, some of the members of the audience felt rickrolled by us playing it at all. Let me just should I read this to you?
Sure.
Also,
please do.
One of the deeper, more nuanced things is obviously we should talk about like the ethics of this, which we can't really do a very full or complete job of in the scope of this episode. Okay, here we go. Write program notes for a middle school honor band concert about the song Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley, arranged by Matt Conaway. Never Gonna Give You Up is a classic pop song by Rick Astley, and this arrangement for middle school honor band by Matt Conaway brings new energy to this timeless hit. With his catchy hooks and upbeat tempo, this song is sure to get your toes tapping and put a smile on your face. I ended up eventually deleting that last line there. Featuring a mix of brass, woodwinds, and percussion, this arrangement showcases the talents of each section of the band. Like, so some of this stuff is like helpful for parents to get on a basic level, but I would have never wanted to write it myself.
So to me, that sounds less like a program note and more like what the narrator at one of those J.W. Pepper CDs would say at the beginning before they play.
Yeah. You're correct. So I said make it more formal. That was the first thing I said. And then it did, but it kept mentioning the audience, and I was like, I don't want you to do that. Oh, well, first of all, it was too formal, so I said, now aim somewhere in the middle. And then it still was like addressing the audience. Like, as we continue our concert, the middle school honor band is excited to present Never Gonna Give You Up, a classic pop. And then I said, okay, remove the parts that address the audience directly. And it does. And then I said, remove the last sentence because I didn't like, we hope you enjoy this unique take on a beloved classic. And then I add a section that gives more information about the original song. And then it added a whole paragraph called "Released in 1987, Never Gonna Give You Up became a global phenomenon, reaching the top of the charts in 25 countries and earning a place as one of the most iconic songs of the era. Its catchy hooks and upbeat tempo have made it a beloved classic that continues to be enjoyed by audiences today." See, I would have never written that. Okay, add a section explaining how the students in the band related to it because it is a meme. Was my next prompt, and so it adds another paragraph. Many of the students of our band were introduced to Never Gonna Give You Up through its popular use as a meme, and we have all enjoyed bringing this classic tune into life in this new arrangement by Matt Conaway. The arrangement showcases the diverse talents of our band, featuring, okay, it goes on and on and on. I said add a part about the arranger, Matt Conaway, so it did. And eventually...
How does it know anything about Matt Conaway?
Oh, it added, let's see, it says Matt Conaway is a highly skilled composer and arranger, and his arrangement of Never Gonna Give You Up beautifully captures the energy and spirit of the original song. It's not going very deep. I did some Googling on Matt Conaway. He has a page on his publisher's website that explains some of it. So I added a couple of, really brief things from that. But I mean, it's all out there on the web, all the little pieces. So this just kind of connected them together for me. And it didn't write anything factually incorrect. It just wrote some things that were like cheesy or inappropriate to read.
Right.
In a program.
Right.
So, I mean, this took me like a couple of minutes to do and was fun. And
the concern in higher ed is that our students are never going to learn how to write, and our students are never going to do their own homework assignments anymore because they'll just feed all of their essay questions into the robot and just copy paste back out of ChatGPT into whatever the learning management system is, and they never have to actually learn how a bill becomes a law because they'll just ask ChatGPT to explain it to them. And my response to that is usually, if your assignments can be done by ChatGPT, then you should probably make better assignments. Because I've never read anything by ChatGPT that sounded, I don't know, anything better than like a kind of bland word salad, which is totally fine for a lot of kinds of writing, right? Like if you need to write an email to somebody that has a lot of kind of boilerplate and get some basic ideas across and doesn't need to win any awards, that's fine. But I don't think anybody would, confuse it for insight, which is hopefully what we're teaching our college students.
Yeah, I mean, ask better questions. I mean, this is the same thing as like why I rarely see any of the tests that we give our students anymore, like asking for like dates of things and names of things. Like there's certain things that we are slowly, as technology improves, like, and I'm not, there are contexts for needing to know those things, but I'm just saying, like, on the whole, you do have to ask a more insightful question, I think. And there's lots of interesting, first of all, amen, topic concluded as far as I'm concerned. That what you're speaking to there is basically how I feel in my it's like my reaction to seeing the teacher outrage over this thing. There's lots of also clever things you can do. I mean, I know teachers who are purposefully making their students use ChatGPT for certain assignments. I saw one teacher who had an essay question, and so she put a prompt. She had ChatGPT answer the essay question, and then like kind of guided it through, like getting it to be a little bit, as good as it could. It was still missing, like had some like very confidently wrong components to it, but like the grammatical core and like the structure of the kind of essay she wanted from her students was there. So she basically took that and then like erased a bunch of the content so that the whole thing was just a skeleton of a structure, a sequence of structured thought, and then gave that to her students. And apparently it really made them think, and they were terrified by it because like of the structure of it. Like they couldn't just say their piece and then move on. It was like there were parts of what she had left in it that forced them basically like to keep expanding on their ideas over and over and over again because they had to fill all of the empty spaces of her outline.
I have colleagues who have used it kind of similarly to ask a question of ChatGPT, and then, as a critical thinking exercise, try to help the students identify, or ask the students to identify, what are the assumptions that ChatGPT is making? What are the problems with the data set? What things does it not understand about the context that you as a human in 2023 can understand? And why is this writing not insightful and simply, regurgitating some basic facts and pretending to tie them together, which is often, I think, what ChatGPT does when you ask it about certain circumstances, that it will identify a couple of facts about the concepts that are involved and then pretend like it has tied them together in some synthesis, but it doesn't actually do so, and it certainly doesn't offer any kind of original thought for why this thing is important. And I think that's the sort of thing that we're asking, hopefully, that we're asking college students to do when we talk about their critical thinking skills and critical theory, is to identify the assumptions that shape their thinking. And ChatGPT is not capable of doing that. Nor do I think it ever will be. I was on a panel about academic integrity and AI, and I said, unless there's a fundamentally differently constructed kind of machine learning system than something like ChatGPT, I don't think it's possible for it to get to be anything better than like pretty impressive buzzword salad, because it's only looking at all the things that people have written that it has access to. And so it is inevitable that the things that it's going to see the most of are cliches. And so when you ask it to write stuff, it's going to be full of cliches and not insight.
I think the thing about the program notes was that there's a time and a place, especially for when you're like in education and like you're to some extent you're educating your audience on what some of the basics are. There's a time and a place to have those, and sometimes that's just not where my head is at. Like I'm thinking about like how do I like balance the band so that we can hear the melody, and that's like not what an audience wants to read about in the program notes of their middle schoolers concert.
You've got different priorities, and frankly, the stakes are not high.
Although there is one other aspect of this that I did want to address, which is I was talking to my colleague, not the orchestra teacher, but the other band director, because we were just like talking about repertoire selection, and I was running into this thing where it's like I have a couple of pieces in my pocket that like I know exactly like they'll like I have a very, very specific goal in mind musically for what I'm going to teach my students with, but like, do I want to play this one of these like 2 or 3 pieces that I've just played so many times with them? And I mean, obviously the human response is like that me as an artist and as an educator who is like living and breathing and like honing their craft, like I need to like learn more music that's out there. Like I'm sure that music is out there. I would love to be engaged in that in every way possible. But there was a brief moment where I turned to her and I said, how long before I can type into the chat bot, give me a grade level 0.5 middle school band arrangement in the key of concert B flat using only the first 6 notes of the major scale in a lyrical style from 60 to 70 beats per minute, no longer than 20 measures, and then have it. Because if you think about the formulas that people use to write and the cliches that people use to write, a lot of those formulas are in music too.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that there's like anywhere like the scale or incentive for someone to make something like this that would like write it in, you know, on a grand staff and like use notation rather than, you know, like obviously like English and like images are two things that we all, you know, I can see why those scale to a way where there's like business reasons why someone would continue to develop those tools more so than like, let me just generate a score for you. But there are people who are doing this kind of thing. I mean, Sight Reading Factory is a tool that a lot of the teachers in our district use, and that to some degree is like generating notes, you know, and that even will do full band sight readings. And you could argue the merit of like how musical they are, but the fact that it's making any kind of like progress in this space at all leads me to believe that like, I don't know, even if all I wanted to do with it was use it as like a warm-up or a teaching tool, I think the idea is interesting. And what are the artistic and ethical concerns you, a composer, would bring to that idea?
I don't know. I think it would be really interesting. I think I would use something like that to like try out ideas or sketch things. I don't think I would like use that as the finished product because similar to what I said about it constructing a few paragraphs of text, I don't think it would ever be something that I would consider good. I certainly would think of it as thoughtful musically, but I could say, hey, what would it sound like if you took this idea and did this with it? And it wouldn't do it exactly the same way I would do it, but it would give me a close enough idea that I could imagine it in a different way. And that would, I think, be helpful to me as kind of almost like a faster way of doing sketching, if that makes sense, of doing a sketch on a piece.
Yeah, I like that idea. Well, I mean, so much, you know, so much great art has come from automation of one kind or another. So, like,
I have asked
you know,
it to write a little bit of music, and it's been all pretty bad so far.
I didn't even know it could, like you mean it actually produces an audio recording?
No, I asked it to create like a bit of music XML, and then I copied that into a file and opened it in Dorico.
I wouldn't have even thought to ask that. So how did it turn out?
It made a D minor scale in eighth notes.
Oh. Do you think you could have like?
I don't think there was any. And I tried a bunch of different things, and this was, and even then it wasn't valid. It got yelled at when I tried to open the file that it wasn't valid XML, which it probably wasn't, but you know, it was fine. And I've seen other people try things with ABC notation, which is another text-based format that's kind of a popular thing on the web in certain genres. And it might be able to do other kinds of text-based music notation input. Maybe I should have asked it to generate some Lily Pond instructions or something. But there's probably a way that you could do it. I mean, you can do code, right? You mentioned asking it to do code. I've had it write JavaScript bookmarklet for me. I've had it write a script to manage files on my computer before. So it can do that kind of thing, and I don't see why it couldn't. It's just that there's not that much source material that it can learn from that is music XML along with annotations explaining what's going on in the music XML. Like the things that I have asked it to do with code before, I think are clearly being informed by blog posts that people have written about how to do that thing in that computer programming language. And those computer programming languages generally are written by humans. Nobody is writing music XML by hand. That's not a thing that ever happens. Unlike writing JavaScript or Python or Bash, which are all languages that I've asked ChatGPT to write, and it has made me very useful things in all of those programming languages. But people don't do that, and people don't write blog posts about hand coding your music XML files, and so there's just not as much information for it to learn from.
Someone did make a video though about having it write a guitar pedal virtual VST software plugin, and I linked that on my blog. That was very cool. It's cool. A YouTube of someone basically having it write the code for a VST, like a virtual guitar pedal that you would plug into a digital audio workstation. And I mean, it takes quite a lot of human input, but like it does it and it works. And he opens it up in Ableton Live and plugs a guitar in, and it adds some fuzz. I thought that was just cool, the coolest. All right, do you want to move on to Mastodon?
Yeah, let's talk about Mastodon.
All right. Mastodon is okay. Oh, geez, where do we start? So Twitter, you deleted all your tweets, didn't you?
Twitter got bought by the bad person. So Elon Musk bought Twitter and has it's been truly astonishing the rate with which he has driven that product into the ground. It's mind-blowing, really. But he quickly made it into a place that I didn't want to be. And about a week or so ago, as we're recording this, he turned off access to the third-party apps that use Twitter. So if you are a Twitter user, you know that you can use Twitter in your web browser. You can go to your local app store and download the Twitter app, and you can use Twitter through there. Or you can download any other application or any number of other applications that can use Twitter and read Twitter.
A lot of people do not know this, by the way. I talk about it all the time, but like no other social media platform lets you, at least anymore. Facebook used to, Instagram used to, but like you cannot make an app and redesign the experience of any of these platforms. Like, so the fact that Twitter still had this option to like use a third-party app was kind of a big deal. It's what made it usable to me.
Right. And if you're not familiar with this concept, think of it like your email, right? You can check your email in your web browser probably, but you can also check your email in, if you're a Gmail user, you can go to gmail.com, or you can use the Gmail app on your phone, or you could use the Outlook app on your phone, or you could use the built-in Mail app on your phone, and they will all check the same email, but they all have different controls, and they all look a little bit different, and they all let you do slightly different things. But kind of at the end of the day, they all let you send and receive email. And so those are all different clients for your email. Twitter clients are just like that. And the thing that I think is not super well understood about Twitter clients is most of the things that we think of as kind of identifying characteristics of Twitter came from third-party applications. So all of the things that we think about as Twitter things, like hashtags, those were created by Twitter apps. People were using hashtags, and then Twitter apps made it so that you could tap on those hashtags and it would automatically show you a search for that hashtag. People were using the @ to mention their friends, and that's a thing that goes back to old, IRC chat at least. And these Twitter applications decided, well, what if I had a search running for that and I could notify you when somebody mentioned you, and then you could tap that @ name and you could go to their profile. All of those things, @ mentioning people, hashtags, even the word tweet, were created by these third-party applications. And so a lot of what we think of as Twitter's culture, in so much as Twitter has culture, was not created by Twitter Incorporated, but was rather created by these clever independent developers building on top of the framework that Twitter provided for them. And unceremoniously, the access that those applications have to Twitter data was shut off, and they gave them no warning, and they even gave them no explanation for about a week after they did this. And so I personally rage quit Twitter. I did not see a good reason for me to be there. I did not want to be a part of that culture anymore. You don't have to, I'm not judging anybody who is staying on Twitter, but I decided that I didn't want anything that I had ever written to be associated with that site. And so I used a service called Tweet Delete, which also uses the same technology that these third-party apps did, and I was worried that it was going to go away. And I think the access these third-party apps have to Twitter data has been getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So they started by cutting off the biggest, most used applications, and they're getting to smaller and smaller applications over the last couple of weeks. So this application called Tweet Delete works using that same access. You just log in and say delete all of my tweets, and it will ask from the last week, the last month, the last year, whatever. And I said, just delete them all. Do it. Delete the whole thing. And so I have, if you go to my Twitter profile, you will see that there is a bio which mentions where you can find me on Mastodon, and no tweets, no media, no nothing. So, and I'm just keeping that there so there's not like a name squatter that grabs it or something. But yeah, I'm off of Twitter. I think a lot of other people have soured on Twitter in the last couple of months for all sorts of cultural and technological reasons. And I don't really feel like I needed anything else, but I do kind of like having something akin to Twitter. And Mastodon has filled the Twitter-shaped hole in my heart.
I think if we're going to talk about Mastodon, it's worth, a lot of people I know are curious about it, but don't really know where to start. And one of the reasons is that the journalists, but also Mastodon, the company, are not doing a super great job explaining the onboarding. And I think everyone is making it sound much more complicated than it is. So I want to try to demystify this idea. Like, Mastodon at its core is really like very, very similar to Twitter. There's some people who like to refer to the very early days of the internet as Web 1 or 1.0. This idea that we have these very, very sort of basic technologies that can sort of interface with each other. Things like email, is built on a lot of the like ideas that have been with us since the very, very beginning of the internet. Even though companies like Gmail and Apple have like sort of added features onto what we now think of as an email experience. Like I know Microsoft Outlook, for example, if I use it in combination with a Microsoft 365 email address, I can actually or someone can like a message I send them, like a social media post, and then I get a little.
I don't like that at all. No, please never like my emails.
And the thing that's frustrating is like email, as an example, is something that people have very different like attitudes about how they approach it, and so I think, and I don't think people understand that there are different experiences, different windows into that. It's like we are using for my job Microsoft email addresses, and I think most people are just using it on the web. They're just logging into their Outlook, the website, and they assume that every other teacher is doing it. So of course I can say yes to this email by just liking it, which makes sense. But then I'm over here on Apple Mail most of the time, not really seeing that. But fortunately now Microsoft sends you a weekly roundup of likes that you've received on your messages. Anyway, so but email has, like at its core, has some very, very basic components of it that have not really changed since email started to become widespread. You could say the same of like HTML, like the kinds of websites that you access in a browser are using like much more updated and like beefed up versions of HTML, but like essentially we're still just like, creating text files in the language HTML, and then like, people are using websites that basically render those into text with formatting and images and things. So like these ideas are what the internet was built on. And then we have what some people refer to as Web 2.0, which is like when Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and all these companies come in and create these sort of like really, really nice packaged experiences, but that are proprietary. So like you can have this public utility of like being connected on Facebook to every contact in real life, and you can have a wall and you can post and anyone can see that, and you can contact each other in our messenger and create events and all this stuff. But we're going to control that entire experience. In fact, nobody can make a third-party app that changes that experience. Only we define it. We define what the app is. We define what the website looks like. And when we decide that we need to make money, we can totally just change the way that your feed works to where you only see like ads, or you see, like when I log into Facebook, I see if I read something or like something and then I come back to Facebook the next day and like one person has commented on that post, I'll like have to reread like the last 8 posts I saw the previous day. Again, will just be the top 8 things in my feed. So like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, a lot of these companies are incentivized to get ad revenue. And so they are basically trying to keep you engaged on their platform as long as they possibly can so that they can serve you more ads and make more money. And what this means is that they create a way that information circulates to you, which is often called the algorithmic timeline, which in my belief about technology is a mostly not really good thing, at least for my own mental sanity and health, or the way that I want to use these things. Like to me, the utility is like, what can the tool do at a most basic level? The utility is not what content are you giving me. Like to me, I want to curate the content. I want to follow the people's tweets I want to choose to follow someone's ideas, and then you give them to me. You don't change the order of them. You don't show me the things that person liked. You don't serve me an ad about something. And that kind of is like what all of these companies are and what Twitter has been for a long time. I have just been bypassing it by using Tweetbot as my third-party client. So here comes Mastodon. Mastodon is part of what some people call Web3. And Web3 is the idea that we can have utilities and services like Web 2 that are really compelling. And we can have a microblogging service like Twitter where you follow people, and then everyone you follow, when they type a tiny little text post, you just see a roundup of all of it. Because that's essentially what Twitter is, add in the fact that you can mention people, hashtag, upload an image or a video. Like microblogging, some refer to it as. Like, let's take that idea, or let's take the idea of YouTube, like publishing public videos, and let's use some technologies that are not locked into one system, some open technologies. Let's basically decentralize this whole thing so that the entire way you interface with this service or this technology is like dependent on which avenue you so choose. So Mastodon is at its core a Twitter clone, a Twitter replacement, at least the way that I see people use it. They write short little posts, you follow people, they follow you, you have a timeline, and the timeline is just an endless scrolling list of the things that people have tooted. Or did they change the terminology? Is it a post now?
I just say post. I think it's there's something whimsical and delightful about toot, but also it feels weird.
So it's right, yeah. And so what's interesting is that Mastodon themselves is sort of, they make the technology, but the idea is that anyone can create an avenue in which you can, tap into Mastodon, and that includes servers, which we'll talk about in a second. But it also means that the entire concept of the experience is actually like designed for a company like the Tapbots, who make Tweetbot, to basically come in and make their own app, because the whole experience is like built around the idea that other people are able to design their own experiences for how you access that content. So like Mastodon is sort of like making the technology, but they do have an app, and it's pretty bad. So like you can get a Mastodon, username, and then like start following people and scrolling around. But I think it's by design, it's kind of cool that like you have so many different ways that you can, but like from the start, like they're not competing, they're not like trying to sell you ads. They're not, I don't know. So what this means is that there's going to be lots more competition with the experience of using the service. It's only in the most recent month that I feel like enough of the people I follow on Twitter have moved to it. I'd say like the third of people I follow on Twitter who are, like the tech people, are all complete, and I mean completely, like none of them post on Twitter anymore. I still want to follow for like the 1/3 music ed, and then like the 1/3 everything else that's on Twitter. But honestly, like Twitter has now sort of been reduced to the way I treat Facebook and Instagram, which is like once a week or so I log into it from a desktop computer web browser just to see if I missed anything big and check notifications, and then I'm kind of done, because the mobile experience of using those apps is really bad, and I don't want to be sucked into that algorithmic timeline.
I think the biggest thing to understand that is the difference between a social network like Twitter and a social network like Mastodon is that, as you were saying earlier, Twitter is a proprietary thing that is owned and operated, and the technology behind it is entirely under the control of one entity, one company. And Mastodon, while there is one kind of organization that decides what the standard is, anybody who has the technical wherewithal can start their own Mastodon server, can start their own Mastodon instance. And this is, I think, one of the things that gets people a little bit confused and turns people off when they are signing up for Mastodon, is that there is this thing that you have to decide on at the very beginning, and that is what server or what instance, those are used more or less interchangeably, you want to be on. And it's not obvious what that means when you're just getting started. And the thing that people, I think, are reluctant to tell you is that it kind of doesn't matter what server or what instance you are on, because you can still interact with all of Mastodon in the same way that if you have Gmail, you can still send and receive email from people who are using Yahoo or Hotmail or, Outlook or whatever their, school email address. You can send and receive email from any kind of email address to any other kind of email address. The same thing is true of Mastodon. And just like Robby was saying earlier, how individual email providers can offer extra features if they want, and not every other server has to be aware of those. The same thing is true of Mastodon. Somebody can set up a Mastodon server that does stuff a little bit differently. Some Mastodon servers have a different set of emoji that they have available to them, and that's like just a fun, goofy little, customization thing that anybody can do. And you can also, even more easily than you can move email, you can move between Mastodon instances. That's a thing that you can do as well. So it's actually a lot more flexible than Twitter, which I understand makes it a little bit harder to get started because it feels like there's more to learn. But I think the thing that I would encourage people to do is just make an arbitrary decision, because you can always change it later. And so I think that's the last thing that I would say. Regarding using it like Twitter, there's one big thing that I'm bummed about that I can't really use Mastodon for yet, and that is watching live sports. It's not quite as fast, I think, because of the way the technology works, but it's also, there's just not that many like sports people there yet. So I want to watch a hockey game, and I used to follow, Blues, the St. Louis Blues, like Twitter while I was doing that, because Twitter would also put together a topic and figure out, this is a hockey game that's happening right now. And so people tweeting with the hashtag STL Blues are going to be talking about the same thing that the people who are, tweeting with whatever the opponent's hashtag is. And so everybody's kind of in one topic that Twitter has kind of figured out. And that's not a thing that Mastodon has figured out. And I don't know if it's a thing that it really can figure out because of the federation system. I guess another really cool thing that I'll point out is the technology that allows messages to, like, updates to be sent across all of these different servers, which is called the Fediverse, which is kind of a cool name, I think. That technology can be used by other kinds of applications as well, and it can be used by things that are like a super customized version of Mastodon. I just learned about a Mastodon instance earlier today that has like a different design. Like, it's specifically made to look a little bit nicer than the regular version of Mastodon. And if you want, there's like a weird open source version of sort of Instagram based around images that you can do. And if you are on Mastodon, you can follow this other kind of Instagram type thing. And that's I think a pretty cool, powerful thing. And that's, I think, another place for third-party developers like Tapbots, makers of Tweetbot and Ivory, now can really take advantage of and figure out how to leverage the power of this system that isn't, it's a lot Mastodon. Like, Mastodon is the biggest chunk, I would think, of the Fediverse at the moment, but it doesn't have to be just Mastodon. Like, there's a federated version of a YouTube type thing for video, and there's a federated version of a SoundCloudy type thing for audio, and there's a federated version of, like a longer form blogging service, and like kind of like a Medium type thing. And so there's I think a lot of room for this to grow, and it's very interesting, and I'm glad that there are a lot more users who are on Mastodon and similar services right now, because I think that's always the problem with new networks like this, is that they only become valuable when there's a bunch of people there already, and they can't become valuable until the people are there. And so there's no incentive to go there because there aren't any people, right? It's this, this cyclical thing, and it needs a really extreme event to break that cycle. And the really extreme event here is Twitter's, impending demise. And so it's been an interesting time.
I would say, the average person I know does not really, is probably going to ride out Twitter until the end. But there are some user interface changes to the Twitter experience that, especially now that you can't use a third-party app, I'm seeing some pretty widespread mainstream outcry over some of the changes that they've made to the way that the app looks and feels. So, and I find it to be pretty unusable ever since, I stopped. Like I really did try for a couple of days after Tweetbot stopped working, but it was just so bad, and all the extra junk that you get in there and the ads and everything. So, I think Mastodon is really a cool thing. It does not matter which instance or server that you join, just join one of them. I think the main misconception I heard early when it was starting to take hold was that people thought it was like more like Discord, where there's silos, there's sort of like small communities, and like your server is like a group of people where you only communicate with those people. And it's really, like you said, so much more like just basically like, who is your email provider? Like I use Apple Mail for my mail, and that really defines the experience and the features of what email feels like to me. But my email address is actually, I have a Gmail one and I have a Microsoft one, and they really like function the same as each other because it's Apple Mail. That's defining the experience, not the person who's storing my messages on their server somewhere. So Mastodon is like that. I do love the idea that because I'm trying to remember the Instagram competitor that you mentioned. I think is it Pixelbee that I'm thinking of?
Pixelbay?
Pixelbay? PixelFed is the name of the app, actually. The idea, it's like the same concept of what we just described as Mastodon, but like a clone of Instagram. And of course, it's never gonna catch on until there's a critical mass of people there. But I do love the idea that because the technology is so open, that if I wanted to use my Mastodon client of choice, which we'll talk about in just a second, and I wanted to follow all your Pixelbee images, I could just follow your Pixelbee account straight from within my Mastodon client because, they use similar technologies. So I think that's cool. I guess we should just say the app that we're using mostly for our Mastodon needs. So the main app is bad. The Tapbots people just yesterday created an app. It's called Ivory. And
well, they created it over
like
several weeks, I think. I don't think it just created it yesterday.
We've been beta testing it for some of that time, and it really leverages a lot of the user interface design cues from Tweetbot. So if you've used Tweetbot, it feels right at home. It's very, very nice. It's a very, very good app. I don't know. Do you have anything to add?
Well, I would just say that it is incomplete still. There's a bunch of things that it does not do yet at all, which are even some very important core Mastodon features it doesn't really do. It doesn't handle things like content warnings super well, which is a thing that Mastodon has. There's a few of these Mastodon features that are a really nice improvement on something. It's not just that this is exactly Twitter, but split up into different, servers or whatever. There's a few different really cool things that it does. And one of them is content warnings. And so you can say, this post is, about something that might not make you feel great, and you don't have to read it, and it'll be covered up and it'll tell you what the nature of the content warning is. And it could be for like really serious things, but it could also just be for like, Last of Us episode 3 spoilers or something like that. And so there's a bunch of nice little features like that Ivory doesn't support yet. And I suspect over time it will get better at all of those things. And the biggest one right now is that it's only available on iOS. It is not available on the Mac yet. They are working on it. They have teased. I've seen some screenshots of Ivory running on the Mac, and I will be there for it on day one. And I'm happy to support the Tapbots guys because I'm sure it's been a pretty rough couple of months for them. So I'm happy to do that. I also, for what it's worth, I pay voluntarily for my Mastodon instance. My Mastodon instance has a Patreon, and I joined the Patreon because I feel like they don't have ads, and I should support them because I want this thing to stick around and succeed. And there are paid. That's another cool thing about Mastodon. Like somebody could. Presumably, I'm sure they have set up a like quote unquote premium Mastodon instance that it costs $4 a month, Mastodon Blue, and you could get access only to their stuff, and their server would be a little maybe faster because it would have more resources because people are paying for it. And so it's a nice and everybody would be on the same thing, just like email, right? You can pay, I don't know how much fast mail costs, but you can pay to have your your email data, not harvested by Google or Microsoft or whomever. And a lot of people do, and a lot of people really love it. And Ivory could be a part of that. They could maybe charge you to use a special Mastodon instance, which I think would be a pretty cool thing to have an integrated app and server thing.
Well, that's the thing, right? Is like that the technology is so open that someone like the Tapbots could really just make the whole onboarding experience way more seamless. Like, I mean, they could just give you, and this is what I think that Mastodon should have done had they been ready for this, is I don't really even think that you should be asked what server you should join. I think they should just by default ask what username do you want, and then great, you're on our server, you can change it later.
Yeah. There's a cool new Mastodon client that is not out yet. That I was talking about this a little bit in the Music Ed Tech Talk Discord earlier today, called Mammoth, and it's a very cool app. And it is they I don't know if they were acquired by a company or if they started a new company around it that has its own Mastodon instance. And part of their thing is going to be that they are going to open source this client application, but you have to, I assume, pay to be on this new Mastodon instance at moth.social. And they could build in some special features for moth.social users into Mammoth. And if you're looking for a Mastodon client, and it is available by the time this episode comes out, I suspect it will be, Mammoth is also quite nice, especially on the iPad or the Mac, where it has a nice like column view.
Yeah, I've been beta testing.
Sorry, I kind of
really nice.
hijacked your Ivory discussion there.
Nope, it's good to have options, and this is exactly the thing that I think is a strength of Mastodon. So I guess what I'm saying is, music educators, it's time. Come on over, join the party.
Yes,
it's a great place. Download one of these cool third-party apps. Start sending some toots.
Y'all should join Mastodon. Robby and I are having a great time.
It's a great time. Really, for real it is. I think that we should just go to iPad apps.
Sure, let's do it.
iPad apps. Creative iPad apps. The things that the kinds of apps that make stuff.
The kinds of apps that Apple likes to show people in advertisements doing with iPads.
Apple does like to. They really like to. They like these kinds of apps. In fact, I think a couple of these apps have been either in keynotes or have even made it into iPad press releases in the past year. So we are collaborating on this episode recording inside of Freeform, which is Apple's new-ish iPad, Mac, iPhone app, which is basically just like an endless canvas whiteboard app, which combines some of the Apple Pencil and like kind of like handwriting features of Apple Notes with some of the things people will recognize from like the Mac iWork suite, like the shapes and text boxes.
Feels a lot like Keynote in some ways, I think.
It feels if for all of the teachers out there who, when you want to make a nice poster, you're making it in Apple's Pages or Keynotes or Keynote. It's just because simply the tools are familiar to you. Like, this app has a lot of those same tools, like the formatting of like sort of dragging and dropping shapes around, moving things forward and backwards. I just wanted to say that like I feel like we knew both going into this that like Freeform was probably not the right tool for creating an outline for a podcast recording. So
no, we knew what we were getting into.
Expectations.
Right. Absolutely.
But but we have enough, hashtag content that I knew that we would have a lot of different kinds of media to throw in it. So like, I put a little outline in there. I dragged some fun shapes in there. My album and app picks of the week, I just put a URL link in there, and it like made a nice, beautiful thumbnail.
That's
for
pretty
each of
cool.
them. I mean, you can, and so it's endless. So you can like, if you zoom out, it's just endless white space. So you can always just keep like branching off and adding new shapes, text, images, handwritten notes, links, URLs, and it's just a very media-rich kind of thing. I love the fact that I can just kind of write on it anywhere. I mean, you just, wrote me a little note of some other stuff that we might talk about today, and write with your Apple Pencil directly into a little empty white space of the canvas. And I don't know. I really like it. I haven't used it enough to experience any of the bugs that I've heard. I see you are in real time dragging a video.
Yeah, there were no videos in here. I felt like
canvas.
they needed to be here. So.
I mean, what did you just do that a moment ago? I mean, it's updated.
No, I'm doing it in real time
on my computer.
I can even tilt them at jaunty angles.
I have in my I have this same document open on the Mac and on my iPad, and I'm seeing. I mean, as you are like spinning around the video, I'm seeing it happen at exactly the same time on both devices simultaneously. This is the stuff
That's
that
impressive.
8 years ago, everyone said Apple couldn't do this stuff, and I feel like they can, but I'm just phrasing it that way because there's so many places they could continue to do it better, and apps like this are proof that they really could do this if they threw all their weight behind making stuff sync better. It just makes me sad that it doesn't work like so much better than even this because Because this is a cooler tool than Jamboard, the Google thing. I mean, I was living in Jamboard when I was teaching virtually, and this is so much friendlier to use. The media is richer. I mean, just in a matter of moments, you get something better looking. Like, Jamboard was just, like, so novel, and, like, I know there's a lot of people listening who probably really love and use Jamboard creatively in the classroom, but, like, it would just always end up being, like, a bunch of, like, Post-it notes everywhere, which you can do Post-it notes in Freeform.
But I really like the look of the link cards here in Freeform. You mentioned it already, but it's really, I think, a nice visual representation of all the different things that we are talking about in this episode.
Yeah, I feel good about it. It's like, because like for us, and I guess I'll put a screenshot of it in the show notes to this episode. So if you're reading the complimentary blog post, you can see our Freeform, including my scrappy. I've like crossed off an Apple Pencil each topic as we've talked about it. Actually, I should probably cross off. We are done all Mastodon related topics. Yeah, I mean the thumbnails look really rich, and this is exactly the kind of thing. I mean, this idea of like having stuff from the web kind of get dragged in and be, you know, where you can like at a glance see like what the content is before you choose to open it on the web. This is really cool. This is the kind of thing that is so awesome that it's like, why doesn't iWork have more of this kind of stuff in it if it's using similar technologies? I'm not 100% sure which technologies are shared between the two. Maybe just like some basics like shapes and text boxes. But like I look at this and I think to myself, okay, like recently Keynote got the ability to like embed a YouTube or a Vimeo video in it just by like pasting the link into your slide, and then it'll actually just like run it from the internet connection. Like it doesn't embed the video. It just, in the same way that Google Slides just lets you like throw web content into slides, Keynote has that for at least videos. And I see this and I think, this is what I want. I want more native apps that feel good to use, that look engaging, that are super simple, but then leverage like native features like Apple Pencil, but also leverage the web. Mm-hmm. And the thumbnail images are, I'm sure they're just pulled straight from the web, but they look so much more engaging than just like otherwise what would just be a hyperlink.
And if you've ever like sent a link in a iMessage chat or in, well, most message systems do this, or posted something on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, you know what kind of this link card looks like, and they just look particularly good.
Not only for Freeform, but for also the iWork suite and for Apple Notes, there's now these cool new collaboration features, where you're like, it's sort of in the same way that like if you're in a Google Doc, you have some conversational stuff happening in the right sidebar, like you can create a note on something and then someone can resolve your comment or reply to it in line. Apple is actually using iMessage for this, and what's really cool is like when I hopped onto my Mac and you had added stuff to the Freeform, I went into our iMessage conversation to tell you I was logging on to Zoom, and actually right at the top of our conversation it said David has made changes to Freeform, and then it had a little button to take me straight into the document. And I see that all the time now with a lot of shared iWork stuff I share with my team. Like if we're all shared in the same, if we're all looking into the same document, I'll see in our iMessage thread anytime someone makes a change, which is kind of nice. It makes sense to me there.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. Also, it makes me want to find more people to collaborate on iWork documents with. I don't have a ton of people in my life that I can do iWork things with, but that sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's apparently also something that third-party apps can tap into. I'm not sure. I think MindNode is probably, they always are so good about. Actually, it's funny, speaking of MindNode, MindNode is an app that I love so much, and it is a mind mapping application for the Mac and iOS, which allows you to type out, it's a mind map. You type out text and then you sort of like branch out nodes outside of that text thought, kind of like a thought bubble, and then with like little lines sticking out of it. And then you can have like other keywords on those lines, and then those can branch out into other things. This whole concept of a node, though, being like a line from one idea to another, I think that Freeform could benefit from this, because what's cool about MindNode and other Canvas apps, because Obsidian has this new Canvas feature too, which introduces nodes. A lot of computer software where you're like sort of mapping out lots of scattered different ideas that are not yet linear is if you connect them with a node and then you move one object, the node stays connected to both things it's attached to, and then sort of like smartly and dynamically shifts all the other content around it. OmniGraffle, where I make my band seating charts, that's another great example of an app where you can connect two shapes and then have the interconnecting line move. So, I mean, right now I've just sort of like drawn a bunch of arrows with my Apple Pencil, but they're static. They don't move with anything or adapt.
Right. They're just pictures of arrows. They don't have any meaning.
So I know that would make it significantly less free if the nodes were attached to things, and it's free form, but I would like some nodes, please.
That makes sense.
I have significantly less to say about these other iPad apps, but I thought we should mention them since when you were on for the holiday gift guide, the Affinity apps for iPad had not yet been released.
Yes.
So
I will just make a plug for the Affinity apps because I love them and they are amazing. If you are doing creative visual graphical things in your workflows at all, and you find that you sometimes need Photoshop or Illustrator or InDesign from the Adobe Creative Cloud, and you are annoyed that you have to pay whatever $60 a month to use Adobe Creative Cloud applications and your employer does not provide them for you, as I am lucky that mine does, you may be heartened to hear that there are other options that are all excellent. And Affinity recently released version 2 of all 3 of their Creative Suite applications. They have their own kind of Creative Suite. It is much smaller than Adobe Creative Cloud, but it is pretty much as powerful as their counterparts in Creative Cloud. So Affinity Photo 2, Affinity Designer 2, and Affinity Publisher 2. These all came out about a month ago, and they are all for very reasonable prices. I should actually know what they are right now, but they're super cheap. They're $50 or $60 a pop, and they're on sale frequently, and you only have to buy them once. You can use them on Mac, Windows, and iPad, and the iPad versions are the full version. They're not like mini iPad versions of the applications. They are the whole versions, and they're very good. So Affinity Photo is kind of a replacement for Photoshop. Affinity Designer is kind of a replacement for your vector graphics application like Illustrator. And Affinity Publisher is a document creation app in the style of InDesign. And so I use these quite a bit just for my own like nerdy fun. I use them when I am putting together blog post images to go in scoring notes posts. I use them when I am designing buttons that go on my Stream Decks. I use them when I use Affinity Publisher for making long kind of handout type things for class. So I have like a course pack that I use for my intro to composition class that has just like 3 to 6 page excerpts of a bunch of different scores that we look at. And so those are in Affinity Publisher. I put my 3rd year review tenure binder materials together in Affinity Publisher a couple of years ago. So there's a bunch of really, really nice things in there, and they are very easy to use. They feel very native to their platforms, even though they're kind of not, because you can use it on Windows too. And they're just very nice apps for a very reasonable price, and I highly recommend them for people who are annoyed at Adobe.
Couldn't have said it better myself. They're great. I really enjoy them. I use Publisher. Now I'm starting to move my concert program workflow over there and do it in there instead of in Pages. So looking forward to that. DaVinci Resolve has an iPad app, and this is like if you were in the situation where you were trying to make virtual choir band orchestra videos back when everything was online a couple of years ago. This is a thing that I put some content out on my blog about, like how to make these things. I actually taught a class here for the Maryland State Department of Education on making a virtual ensemble, and it was a mixture of like different people using different software. There was some iMovie, there was some WeVideo, but there was also a lot of Final Cut, some Adobe. A lot of people were using DaVinci Resolve, which is like a free video editor that has quite a lot of powerful tools. I mean, it's definitely one of these things that, can compete with the feature set of Final Cut. I don't consider it to be as like easy to use and friendly. However, it has for a free app that has the power that it does, I would consider it to be pretty well designed, and definitely not like on another planet. Like if you've used any one of these other competing tools, then DaVinci Resolve will definitely be something that you can find your way around. And they have released an iPad version, which I have not spent a ton of time with, but it is pretty fully featured, to the point where like the only criticism I've really read about it is that it's so similar to the desktop version that like not everything feels perfectly adapted to a touchscreen.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to consider that a win for the iPad anyway, because I want more professional creative software on the iPad.
And if you're into any like audio video stuff, you will know the company that makes Resolve, because it is Blackmagic Design that makes a bunch of really great AV capture equipment and cameras and stuff like that. So if you are into that scene, this is a good company to get to know.
Yep. 2 more. They're in beta, and I'll just mention them because they're Mac apps that I really like a lot. And I won't say too much specifically about the iPad apps, but one is called Deckset. Gosh, we keep mentioning Obsidian, but not really talking about Obsidian. I think, can we after show the fact that, can we talk after for the Patreon subscribers about your future? I want to convince you to try a few plugins.
Yeah.
I know you want to talk
you can
about,
cut whatever I said earlier at the beginning about Obsidian too, if you want to just save all the Obsidian talk for the after show.
Yeah, we can maybe. Do we want to talk about Stream Deck Plus also and shortcuts in the after show?
Sure.
Okay. I'm gonna apparently teach you to make a cross-device shortcut, and you're gonna tell me about your Stream Deck Plus, and I'm gonna recommend some Obsidian plugins to you. Patreon.com/musicedtechtalk. Come get the unedited version of this show, the bootleg I call it, although it is actually edited to some extent, but like less so than the one I put out there. Okay, so Obsidian though. Why did I mention Obsidian? Oh, right, because we were talking about Obsidian workflows, and one of those little paper cuts where it's like I want to go all in on craft, but Obsidian does things so well, is that Obsidian is just reading a folder of text files on my computer. So all of my notes are actually under the hood, just little .txt files. But Obsidian presents them to me in more of a notes-taking interface, which is where I can sort of see the connections between them more meaningfully. And I like that. I like that quite a lot. So one of the reasons I like it is because sometimes I want to have different apps pointing to the same text file. And Deckset is an app that looks at a text file that's formatted in Markdown. If you don't know what Markdown is, I've got a blog post that you should go check out, which I'll link in the show notes. But basically, this app, Deckset, looks at a Markdown file, a file that is nothing but text, and it creates basically like a PowerPoint presentation using that text. You have a little bit of syntax. You have to do 3 dashes to show when the end of one slide happens and the beginning of the next one happens inside of the text file. So like if I say like hashtag, like when you're talking about Markdown, do you call it a hashtag? Is that the correct terminology?
I say £, but
you don't. £, because it's not a hashtag. That symbol that serves both of those functions.
Or sometimes I'll just say hash.
You type it once, a hash. You type it, you hit a space, and then you type slide 1. And then you go to the next line, and then you do a dash and then a space. That's bullet point list 1, and then you hit enter, and then so that will basically generate a slide that has a giant bold title that says slide, and then your bullet point list all formatted. And then so basically, Deckset is sort of like an app where you design the style of how your slides look, but then the actual content of your slides is all in a text file. So I have this daily note inside of Obsidian where I do my lesson planning for the day, and then I take notes on things that are happening throughout the day. But inside of that note is a Markdown file that shows me in plain text what are the things I want to rehearse for the day, and then what is the sectional schedule for the day. And I just edit those right in Obsidian like I'm editing a note. But then my Deckset app is pointing to that same file, and is when I plug in my computer to the front of the room, is able to show a really good looking slide that I've customized, but that contains the same text from my lesson plan. So I'm doing something that used to take me a lot of fiddling with multiple apps and like typing the same information twice. I'm just typing it all into one true source, and then I'm getting a text legible lesson plan that I can read and a slide that I can display. So that's Deckset. It's coming to iPad eventually. The other app is Soulver, which is the plain, I guess you could call it a plain text calculator. It's a natural language calculator where for the Mac you type in like, 1 pizza plus 2 pizzas equals, and then it'll tell you 3 pizzas. So basically you type in natural English and then it finds the numbers in your strings of text and then automatically calculates them.
And for certain kinds of units, that can be super useful. The thing that I think is the most useful is like for time related things, where you want to know, what is 72 minutes after 9:25 a.m. or, you can do calendar math too, which can be a little tricky sometimes. So yeah, it's a handy little thing. By the way, that's also a thing that ChatGPT is useful for. I use it for making syllabi this semester, and I can say, give me the date of every Monday and Wednesday starting January 16th, 2023 and ending May 6th, 2023 in the form of a Markdown list, and it does it.
Oh, nice. Wow, love it.
But my point is, that Soulver can also do that kind of date and time math, which can be a little bit tricky sometimes.
I have my favorite thing, which, by the way, you can get if you subscribe to me on Patreon. Patreon.com/music and tech talk. I have a Soulver file because one of the perks I give is like a bucket in Dropbox of a bunch of like teaching documents and nice resources and things I've made. One of them is a Soulver file, which if you use the app Soulver, it is a pizza calculator that I based on my colleague, Ben Denny, past guest on the show. And I call it I don't know what I actually call it. I probably don't name it after him because I didn't ask for his permission, but I call it in my own personal conversations, the Denny pizza calculator. Basically, he's like, whenever we travel and we need to feed children, he has figured out the most cost-effective way to do it by going to Costco, but in advance ordering the pizzas and then having them like double cut the slices into small skinny slices because children are small. And then he knows exactly like which brand of water is the cheapest and like how many cookies to get. So basically it's like a Soulver file, but that in English explains everything that's happening. So like it basically says like how many students are going on this trip, and then you just change the number. And then it says, how much, it has like a variable basically for like, you tell it how many, dollars the current price of pizza, is at Costco. And what it does is it calculates for you like how much it's going to cost you to feed the number of kids you were taking on the trip and how many pizzas you need to order in advance from Costco. And then how many cases of water do you need to buy? How many cases of cookies do you need to buy? And which should you be expecting to cost? And what do you need to charge each kid for the pizza? That and my OmniFocus project template, which reminds me like all the things I need to do to prepare for a concert. Between those two things, it's like it just makes it harder to mess up something. So there you have it, the Denny pizza calculator.
That sounds pretty cool.
Segments?
Yeah, let's do it.
Are you gonna pick Ivory for your app of the week? I thought you might want it, so I have a backup.
I was gonna let you pick Ivory, but if you want, I can pick it. I have one too.
The only thing, okay.
Mine is a Mac app. So
right, I'm going Ivory.
Okay.
And we already talked about it. That's my app pick of the week.
All right. My app pick of the week is something that I just discovered today that I have 2 colleagues who should know about this and didn't know about it. And so I thought there might be people here who should know about it as well. If you ever find yourself teaching electronic music or just wanting to play around with electronic music, you may have heard about the Eurorack system, which is a system for a modular analog synthesizer. The problem with that, especially if you're using it to teach, is that the modules and the system is kind of costly and takes up a lot of space. There is this really cool software simulator of a modular synthesizer. And if you want to teach people about how synthesizers work, it's really useful to be able to do that from these really fundamental principles. If we start with this oscillator and we plug this oscillator into an amplifier and it sounds like this, and we can modulate it in these ways, and we can also make a sawtooth wave and notice how the sawtooth sounds like this other thing that you're familiar with, and all these kinds of like basic concepts in electronic music all really come from analog synthesis, but analog synthesis requires a lot of costly gear. So this is an application called VCV Rack, and VCV Rack is completely free, and you can play around with it. It is a graphical interface. It is designed to look like one of these synthesizers. You put a module on your rack and you plug stuff into it, and you plug that stuff into other stuff, and you plug that stuff into other stuff, and pretty soon you've got a pretty rad little synthesizer going. So anybody can play this. You can give students kind of a starting point template file kind of thing. It's a little bit similar to Reason, if you ever used Reason back in the day, but this is free and it runs on Mac, Windows, and Linux, and it's a lot of fun, and it's a great educational tool. So you can make a little simple oscillator and plug it into a digital version of an oscilloscope, and you can show students what is going on to make the sounds that they are hearing, and it's a really powerful learning tool, and also it's fun to play with. And it's free.
I'm going to definitely be checking that out. Nice. Okay. I'm going to give my tech tip of the week, which is a simple one. YouTube shortcuts. I use a lot of YouTube in the classroom, and a lot of times it's full screen, and I don't have all the little clicky do on screen. And you know what? Do you know who teaches me the YouTube shortcuts? My students do. And the other day, I was just like, I'm always like going in and out of full screen, and I just like started yelling into the air, like, how do I just tap a button and make it go into full screen? And someone's like, yo, Mr. Burns, just press the letter F. And I was like, F
is in full screen.
Why didn't I see it? But of course, obvious ones: spacebar, left and right arrow. If you're like me and you're constantly just navigating YouTube, and it's like a primary way that you play musical excerpts for your classes, or guitar play along videos, or whatever it might be, learning a couple of basic shortcuts is pretty good. Do you know any ones? Are there any good?
The left and right arrow keys are the ones that I use probably the most, and that jumps forward and backward, I think 5 seconds or something like that, which is a really good amount for most of the durations of videos that I'm interested in. And you can like mash it if you need to go a minute forward or something, but it's way nicer than trying to drag the slider around. Yeah, that's the one that I use the most. And really, I do use F as well.
Yeah.
And it's a good one. I guess I use spacebar. Spacebar is probably the one I use the most. Every media app should obey the spacebar to play pause. That should be a law. If the European Union can mandate that the iPhone needs to have USB-C, surely they can mandate that every media player needs to use the spacebar as the play pause toggle.
I do not disagree.
So my tech tip is for people who, like me, are on a Mac and find themselves having to use Microsoft Office applications. Maybe your institution or your work has an Office 365 subscription that you are a part of, and you are occasionally called upon to open a Word doc or an Excel spreadsheet, or heaven forbid, a PowerPoint deck. And you have this horrible little application running in the background on your computer called Microsoft Update, which will interrupt you at the least opportune time, and you cannot tell it not to. And it is really poorly designed so that the most obvious button is to check for updates, but the less obvious button is to actually install those updates. And after it installs them, it immediately pops up again and asks you to check for updates again, which is insanity. Get rid of that application. It's garbage. Never install it on your computer. But you might say to yourself, David, sometimes people send me Word docs. Those people are rude. Don't email people Word docs. If you're just sending somebody a file, send them a PDF like a gentleman. Second of all, get rid of those applications on your computer and install Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, Microsoft PowerPoint, Microsoft Outlook, whatever applications you need. Install them from the Mac App Store instead, and let the Mac App Store handle all the updates. You can log in with your Office 365 subscription, do all of those things that you need to do, and you can get the scourge that is Microsoft Update off of your Mac.
It's the only way. I had to fill out a timesheet the other day in an Excel doc. Is that as egregious as a Word doc?
No, because Excel can can actually do some nice things. I'm not wild about Excel. Here's a bonus tech tip. If you're on an Apple device and you are just using Word and Excel out of habit, or PowerPoint for that matter, out of habit, I would encourage you to just take a spin in Pages. Take a spin in Numbers. I find Numbers to be delightful. I find the infinite scrolling of an Excel spreadsheet to be a little disconcerting. I feel the call of the abyss when I am opening an empty Excel spreadsheet that goes for 1,000 cells in every direction. That makes me deeply uncomfortable in my soul. And Numbers solves that problem and a lot of other problems, and it looks so much nicer. I make spreadsheets for people in Numbers, and they're like, whoa, this looks so beautiful. How did you do it? And the answer is I did not touch Excel.
True. I also use Numbers for all of my spreadsheet needs. It looks great.
It's really nice. You can have separate tables that aren't related to one another right next to each other. It's such a smart idea.
It is. It really is. My music pick of the week is some K-pop.
All right.
And I got a gift card to a place nearby called Honey Pig, a gift card from one of my private students. And a Honey Pig is like, it's one of these Korean barbecue places, but that has like mass appeal, It's like the really popular one that everybody in the area knows about. And, a lot of these more popular venues for Korean barbecue are characterized by having like lots of like widescreen televisions playing K-pop music videos, which I love. But so anyway, so like one of the things that I do with my toddler is like whenever we're at a new place, he has to check out the bathroom of that place. And the reason he has to check out the bathroom is because he has to know, is there a speaker in the bathroom? Because if there's a speaker, it might be playing some cool music. And so we went into the bathroom of the Honey Pig, and it was playing some very, very, very cool music. So cool that I asked my watch to Shazam it, and it was awkward because I was washing my hands at the really good part of the song, and I was like, I don't want this song to stop, and then I missed it. So I had to and there was someone in the stall nearby, so I had to while washing my hands lean my face into my watch and whisper, but just loud enough, "Yo Dingus, what's the name of this song?" And I was successful in learning that off of the EP The Code by Cipher, this song is called Fame. And it's a really hip, danceable song. I don't know how to explain it as distinct from other K-pop songs, other than that one component of the song has some cool jazz chords on the piano that are arranged in a way in which it reminds me of a lot of mid-90s Sega Saturn soundtracks. I actually have an Apple Music playlist I've started called Reminds Me of Sega Saturn. And it started with weird fusions of jazz and pop and contemporary songwriter music that just pretty much anything that sounds weirdly jazz fusion, but that a composer making video game music put a spin on it. If it has any cues from that sound, whatever that sound is in your brain, then I typically put it there. It also, I more broadly now just include any songs that have blips and bloops in the arrangement. But anyway, so it's got some jazz chords, and I was just this reminds me of Sega Saturn. And so,
do you ever unintentionally find yourself in a position where your students can see what your playlist names are, just a big list of all of your playlist names?
Sure, if I'm streaming my computer. And
yeah, did they ever ask you about them? What does remind me of Sega Saturn? Okay,
yeah, they don't, because they never see that one. So if I have Apple Music open pretty big, you're going to see in the sidebar, listen now, browse, radio, recently added, artists, albums, songs, genres, music videos made for you, and then playlists start. And then it's there's two areas. There's stuff that I guess they collapsed it all into one. So there's things I subscribe to that are Apple Music curated playlists, but then I have my own. And then I have some subfolders because I am an Apple Music power user. Although, can you really be an Apple Music power user if it cannot be used the way that it is designed to be?
I would say the majority of my listening actually happens in Spotify, but I occasionally I will be in a similar situation where I'm showing my computer screen and we're listening to something in Spotify, and in the left-hand side, my students will see that I have a playlist called something like choral music that doesn't suck, a comprehensive list, and it's like 10 minutes long. and the or I like to use emoji in unexpected places, and so I have one with a little baby emoji in the front of the name, and it's called Baby's First Chromatic Music, and it's things that I will ask my students to listen to when I'm asking them to try new things harmonically that they're really uncomfortable with. It's like, what if that chord just had one accidental in it? And so anyway, it's a playlist that I use for that kind of thing. And I've got a bunch of playlists like that. And like, what is Baby's First Chromatic Music? That's weird. So anyway, I was just curious if your students, because surely your students have no idea what a Sega Saturn is.
No, I probably owe it to them to tell them what it is, though.
It's your duty, I think. Yeah.
Do you know how playlists are organized alphabetically? Like the letter A, if I have Apple Music in full screen, you cannot even see the letter A, because I have some smart playlists. I have some folders that are all organized towards the top. And then I have some that are important enough to me that I actually put an underscore in front of the title to make sure that they show up at the top. And then if you scroll down quite a little bit, then eventually, here we go, All Gould. That's a smart playlist of everything Glenn Gould I have in my library.
Nice.
That's a pretty important one. Cello Suites. Here's more K-pop, BTS Essentials, but that's an Apple Music playlist.
Let me blow your mind. In Spotify, you can make folders for your playlists, and you can have levels of folders for your playlists. And
There's a lot of things to like.
You can order your playlists arbitrarily inside of those folders.
If only Spotify could just make plain local music across my computer and mobile devices.
That's obnoxious. That's bad. Yes, I agree with that 100%. So my album music pick thing of the week is a record that I was introduced to when I was in graduate school by my good friend Nate Blyton, and Nate introduced me to this band called The Books. And The Books is, I think they're just two dudes, and they made all of this music it sounds very like early 2000s like indie rock kind of vibe for a lot of it, but my understanding is, I'm totally explaining this like fourth hand, so this may be totally wrong, but I think one of these guys was working at the Library of Congress in the recorded sound collections at the Library of Congress doing something, and every time he would come across an interesting sound in the collection, he would save a copy of it for his own personal collection. And so they use a lot of found sounds in these otherwise pretty straight ahead indie rock songs. And there are these old recordings of people talking, of phone and technology sounds, of all kinds of things. There's a couple of really great songs on this record. One that I really like is called An Animated Description of Mr. Maps. And there's a section in the middle that's kind of like something of a breakdown section, where you hear these recordings of the same person giving descriptions of people. And it's not clear to me where these came from, because he's not clearly always describing the same person. But the drummer is like playing along with the speech rhythm of what's going on in these like relatively naturally spoken speech samples from some like 1930s radio show or something. It's a really cool little moment. In the very next track, it goes right into a track called Venice, which is entirely a radio program where there is a radio announcer that first talks to Salvador Dali and then describes this like kind of art happening that Dali performs live in Venice. And the whole time it's just a straight ahead recording of this radio program, and then they're playing music underneath it, and that's the whole song. It's a very, very cool record. I like it a lot. It's called Lost and Safe by The Books.
You've got my attention, that's for sure. All right, looking forward to checking that out. Well, we're going to do some topics for the Patreon listeners to the bootleg version of this feed. I'm going to convince you to try some Obsidian plugins. I'm apparently going to teach you how to make a cross-device shortcut in the Shortcuts app. You're going to tell me about the Stream Deck Plus, and then also we're going to talk about using AI features in Craft.
All right.
Combining two things we talked about earlier. So all of that and more if you stick around. Otherwise,
Ooh.
David, see you later.
I'll see you later, Robby. This has been fun.
Today, I would like to introduce you to my scale exercise play-along tracks with trap beats, available for sale at robbyburns.com. These trap beat play-alongs include over 72 audio recordings, each of which includes a count-off, a trap beat at 70 beats per minute, and a tuning drone playing both the tonic and each note of the scale in just intonation, so your ensemble can learn to play in tune, develop steady, sustained tone, and blend with other sounds. These drones are stacked over top engaging trap beats that help students to practice at slower tempos while developing steadiness of time and a better concept of how the beat is subdivided. The scale exercises include whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, scale in thirds, and a mini scale with an arpeggio at the end in all 12 keys. I've also included 3 speed variations of a Remington exercise, so band ensembles can work on their favorite tone and technical exercises, whether they be from a method book or of your own invention. The tracks are $15, but for $40, you can get the stems to the tracks in Logic Pro and GarageBand format, so that you can do things like speed them up and slow them down, change the pitch, add your own accompaniment, take out my voice and add your own,
and 2 and 3 and go,
or even sequence the tracks together to completely automate your ensemble warm-up. These tracks are perfect for running through your Google Meet, Zoom, or virtual teaching platform of choice, or for running through the loudspeakers at the beginning of your in-person rehearsal. Check them out now at robbyburns.com/store. I'm Robby Burns. Thanks for listening to Music Ed Tech Talk. You can find the show's page, show notes for the episode, and my blog at musicedtechtalk.com. You can subscribe to blog posts through an RSS app of your choice, and you can subscribe to the podcast in the podcast app of your choice. You can now get blog posts delivered right into your email inbox once a week. Please rate and review this show in the podcast app. It absolutely helps. It'll take a second and just a few taps. Word of mouth is helpful too, so please spread the word about it. Learn more about my music and teaching career at robbyburns.com. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube at Robby Burns. Please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/musicedtechtalk. All support tiers get perks, but even the base tier gets you access to the Music Ed Tech Talk Discord community, where you can chat with other supporters and guests of the show about music, apps, pedagogy, lesson ideas, tech support, and more. It's a fun place to be, and I hope to connect with you soon. Thanks to this week's sponsor, Scale Exercise Play Along Tracks. Be sure to check it out, and see you next time.